So this is the second of the Dinky Die Cast Toys catalogues that I was able to get from Leicester Vintage Toy Store. And as you can see, this one is still the princely sum of 5p. This is number 13. But there are some interesting little differences here, because aside from the fact that there's a Klingon battlecruiser on the front cover of this one, which I think was a new release with this catalogue from the looks of it, the Dinky logo has also changed a little bit. It's more three-dimensional than it was in the previous version. And I'll call out a couple of other little sort of differences in terms of the way that they're now approaching themselves marketing-wise. So on this first page, we've got more of a sort of combined Gerry Anderson page, but you might notice that the Eagle freighter is now blue, and its pod is also changed from red to white. Now, there's no reason on Earth for this, or indeed the Moon, for this to be the case, because none of the Eagles were particularly coloured, apart possibly from the VIP one in the series. They certainly were never green, and they were never blue, basically. So the green one is as it was in the previous catalogue, but this blue one is just a repaint of the previous version. What I have found out that's interesting, though, and it does explain something for me, is that some of these models were in production for a very, very long time. So those Eagles actually originally came out in 1975. This catalogue actually dates from 77. And interestingly, the list that I'm looking at actually has the Enterprise dating from 77 as well, but it is in this catalogue. Whereas it was also in the earlier catalogue that I've done a video on, which is the 76 catalogue. So maybe the dates I'm looking at aren't quite precise, but I think for a lot of these things, for example, the UFO Interceptor on this page, I have a year for it of 1971. So it's entirely possible that they kept these things in their catalogue for quite a long time, and presumably they kept selling, otherwise they wouldn't have kept making them. Other interesting thing to note here as well is that there are subtle differences. The Shadow sort of missile launcher has a slightly different coloured missile in this image than it does in the previous catalogue, and you'll see in the sort of the drawn version of the UFO Interceptor that its missile is white and red there, whereas it's now yellow and black on the actual toy itself. The other last thing I want to draw your attention to here is the fact that there's a kid here, and the previous catalogue did not include children until the rear section with adverts for other toys from the general kind of range. So this is actually quite a distinct difference. So somebody somewhere in Dinky obviously decided they were going to take a slightly different approach to try and keep themselves, slightly more relevant. So they've put various kids in various places to try and demonstrate the fact that, hey, these are toys. It's like, okay. So if I move on to the next page, this one is more Gerry Anderson, and here we have the rather daft blue Thunderbird 2. Again, for no apparent reason that I can sensibly explain to you. And there's also it hasn't scanned terribly well, but there's also the armoured command car again, which was in the previous catalogue. So again, holdover from the previous year. Now, I never owned that Klingon battlecruiser that you can see there, but you can slot discs into the top of its sort of bridge section and then fire them out. That was its gimmick. I quite fancy one now, actually, because I did have the Enterprise, as I probably mentioned last time, and that was quite cool as well. So I might keep an eye out for those and see if I can get them loose. I suspect they're astronomically expensive in their boxes, but they're there. And I say the Klingon battlecruiser is definitely a new addition. I can't even remember seeing it in shops particularly, and to be honest, I don't even know how old I was when I picked up the Eagle Freighter, the Eagle Transporter rather, and the Eagle Freighter actually, but they were the previous versions, so I must have got quite old stock, either that or they released them again. But there would only have been, I would imagine, 2 more Dinky catalogues, because Dinky Toys went out of production in 79. So that was it for Dinky at that point, because apparently they were up against people like Mattel, who were doing Hot Wheels and things even back then, and they were just going to get clobbered by them. So they had to give up the ghost at that point. So if we move on from the licensed products, we sort of then move into their more generic fare, and as with the last catalogue, you know, we've got sort of fairly generic police cars and racing cars and that sort of stuff. So there isn't, as far as I'm aware, there aren't any particular licensing things there. Oh, apparently that 113 is from the New Avengers. I do kind of remember them. But that seems to be about it there. So no particular memories for me there. No particular memories for me on this page either. Various opening doors and boots and so on, because they were desperately trying to keep themselves relevant. But, you know, some of these look more cheap than others, basically. I think it's fair to say. And the next page has a Rolls-Royce, a very old Range Rover. That pickup rescue truck looks vaguely familiar to me. I'm going to have little stretchers in them in this version of them. That's interesting. So a little bit more play value there than perhaps in the last catalogue. And then we've got various police cars and fire engines. So again, probably much as they were before. And then we get a few more London buses and a sort of almost like an American. Oh, apparently it's a Swiss postal bus, whatever that is. I have no idea, but okay. What else have we got? So we've got the London taxis still there. Various Bedford vans, Ford Transit van. Then we get into various diggers, and which I don't think were in the previous catalogue, and a steamroller of all things. So yes, they obviously sort of extended it, and quite a good looking crane with an extendable hook. I want to say it's a jib arm, but I'm not sure if that's the correct phrase for it, but something like that anyway. So they look like they'd be quite good fun. They look like they're getting a bit more plasticky than they were last time, which I suppose was maybe part of the course. And then there's some farm sort of trucks here, which again look decidedly plasticky. Tractor, sort of fuel tanker. They are looking increasingly cheap, it has to be said. And yet 5 super new wagons apparently, although they don't look that super to me. They're pretty generic. In the sort of the green one actually needs to say army on the side of it in case you didn't get that it was an army truck. So it's not great, if I'm honest. Not really my thing. And then we're into 1/35th scale big guns that fire plastic shells apparently. And again the German motif and a kid in slightly random camouflage equipment. And then we get into the Dinky Catalog. Now, interestingly, this catalogue is shorter than it was before. So, although there's a one side of one page of it here, and there's a double page here, there isn't another page after this. And in the previous catalogue, there was. So, there's an indication there that the range is starting to shrink. So, there's actually, in this image, there's actually a blank page to the left, but my scanner didn't pick up on it because it's blank. So now there's just more guns and a gun carrier and an anti-tank gun, a US Jeep with a howitzer, all that sort of good stuff. And more guns, 132 scale and 140 scale, complete with camouflage net apparently. So I mean, they are still clearly trying quite hard. You know, there still are accessories and stuff here which perhaps there weren't in the previous catalogue, actually, in fairness to them. So they are trying to make themselves attractive still. And we get 150 scale. So these guys are obviously... Now, I think if 150 is smaller, or if they're just representing bigger vehicles, they end up being about the same size. Hard to know precisely. We've got a Leopard recovery tank, a Leopard anti-aircraft tank, a leopard tank, and a chieftain tank. Okay, let's see what else we can find. So we've got another selection of lorries, an amphibious boat, a parachuting jeep, and some carriers for a helicopter and a tank. That's quite interesting. And then we're into the planes, and this plane section isn't quite as exciting as it was last time. Actually, it's more sort of matter of fact in terms of what the range is. So you've got Spitfires and Thunderbolts. Now, last time there were planes that had actual motors in. Now, they may have stopped doing them at this point. So they drop cat-firing bombs, apparently. I think the helicopters that are around can actually have their blades moved. And there's another helicopter here. That helicopter with the 66 on the front is quite interesting, because that looks like it's got a sort of an Apollo capsule that you can pick up, or maybe it's just a life raft, I'm not sure. It looks more like a capsule to me, but I could be wrong. But it's just a Sea King anyway. Now I reckon it's got a motor-driven main rotor blade and finger-driven winch. So maybe there are still some motors in those. And then this is completely random. Coast Guard amphibious missile launch. I'll leave that to your imagination as to what that's supposed to represent in the real world, but there you go. There is apparently a new Submarine Chaser on the other page. And some of those other ones that are familiar, I think, from the previous catalogue. Now, this is quite interesting given current events. What we have there is a Jubilee Bus for the 1977 Queen's Jubilee, which puts it at 45 years ago that happened. And of course, now sadly we're about to have her funeral, her state funeral. So yeah, strange thing to come across. I sort of smiled quietly to myself as I scanned that in, because it's you know, just another reminder of just how long she was with us for, bless her. So that's that, and she's next to Cinderella's coach, which I suppose isn't that far off one of her state coaches either, ironically, but there you go. So that's the one sort of nod of the head to something, you know, sort of vaguely traditional and very British, clearly. Which is quite nice to have in the catalogue, I suppose, at this point in time. And then, of course, we switch over to the Meccano Ads, because Dinky was only actually a brand of Meccano. So Meccano actually owned them. Well, they didn't even own them, because it is literally just a brand, so they're just a sort of subset of Meccano, basically. So, again, we've got the kids coming to it again. More kids. Now, that plastic Meccano looks awfully familiar to me. I think I might have had some of that plastic Meccano at one point when I was very little. Quite possible, I think. There's also this Prima, I think it is stuff again. Pocket Meccano, which I guess is just small sets. I'm sure my lad's got some of that. I mean, it's probably still around in some variety. And then there's a standard range on the next page with various motors and bits and bobs. I was never massively into Meccano. I don't think I had that much of it, if any. But yeah, more of a Lego kid, me. Then motorized Meccano multi-kit crane building set. Now those army sets, I think, are different. They weren't in the previous catalogue. It looks like you can build more than one thing out of the set. Although, as I say, there are 4 specialised sets, each with a particular theme. So, yeah, interesting. And then these Mogul steel toys, which I think last time I said reminded me a lot of Tonka. But obviously aren't, as far as I'm aware. But, that looks like that range has been expanded on a little bit, actually. But nothing sort of hugely exciting from my point of view there. And then we're just onto the back page with a few exemplars there. And you can just see at the bottom left corner there that this is the 1977 version. And they're still based in Liverpool. And it's Meccano Limited. who are clearly the owners of the brand. Then I just included this because this one actually has a nice little wraparound cover, which I sort of noticed as I was scanning it in. So I thought you might like to see the full sweep of it, because they obviously made quite a big deal of the the Star Trek tie-in, which is very sensible of them, because quite frankly, a lot of the other stuff in there is pretty generic at this point. And I don't know whether they've really gone to quite as much trouble with this catalogue as they did the previous one. The fact that it's got lots of pictures of sort of kids in it suggests to me that, I think they've tried to Americanize it more. Maybe because Mattel were doing something similar at the time, I don't know. But it's quite interesting as well, because when I was reading around it a little bit more, of course, there was also Corgi, who had a lot of the licensed tie-ins. And really, getting the Star Trek and the Jerry Anderson licenses that was about as far as Dinky went in terms of being able to compete on that front. So, which is good in the sense that I loved my Space 1999 Eagles that I had from that particular era, and I have quite fond memories of the Enterprise as well, actually, and the UFO Interceptor. So, I mean, for me, the Jerry Anderson stuff was definitely a big draw to Dinky Toys. But a lot of my other ones were Corgis, just because they had things like Buck Rogers and such like as well, which I really enjoyed. So there was a bit of a sort of competition in the market there for who had those particular licenses. But so these are the only two Dinky catalogues that I have. But I thought it was just quite interesting because they obviously sort of transitioned from one sort of presentation style to another between the two of them, which is total fluke on my part. I didn't know they did that at all. But it is also interesting to see just how long their ranges actually ran for, and it probably also explains why it's relatively straightforward to pick up examples of them, because clearly they were in production for a long time, and being die casts, obviously, a lot of them have survived. So I'm sure you can pick them up loose very, very easily. The ones that are in boxes will obviously be another question again in terms of the actual cost, but I'm sure they're out there, and I've seen some in my very local store as well. So they're definitely around. If you were at all interested in trying to sort of build up a collection, it wouldn't be difficult. So that's it on this front for the time being. I don't know if I'd particularly need any others, because this is probably about the extent of their range covered between these two. I know that they started a lot earlier than this. I mean, they were in production for a solid, I want to say, probably getting on for 50 years over the span of their sort of life as Dinky, as a subset of Meccano. So there would be a lot to collect. Although that's not as much as you might think, because as I say, I think a lot of the models run for quite a long time. But yeah, so that's it for this one. So I hope that's been of interest historically, if nothing else. And I don't know, have a look on eBay and see if you can find them loose if you fancy it. Cheers for now.